At EJI, obviously we're one of the things we do there is defend people on death row, defend youth sentenced to life without parole around the country. We also have an educational component where we work to help people understand the connection between the history of racial injustice in this country and our current problems with mass incarceration and the death penalty. Depending on where we are, there are certain things that we don't have to say, right? So we're here in this space. This is a memorial park. We know that we don't have to sell you on the value of recognizing history and of understanding the connection between what happened yesterday and today. But if we look at this park right now, if you look to the right there and you see that tomb of the unknown slave and the unknown soldier, and then we see the quote on this beautiful monument here, and then next to us behind Miss Faya right here, you see the monuments that begin to recognize those folks who participated in Bloody Sunday and in the Selma to Montgomery March, Miss Robinson and Miss Foster. What we want to do at EJI is make sure that we fill in some history so that we can understand the narrative in a fuller fashion. Some of us who are from Alabama and from the Black Belt, we know that lynchings were taking place throughout our history. But many of us don't understand the scale and the scope of that and how that shaped our history, particularly in regards to the civil rights movement. So right here, we have a marker that Kiara will tell you a little bit more about, but it's going to memorialize African-American victims of lynching, just 3 of the actual 19 people who were lynched here in Dallas County. In our research at EJI, we found that there were over 4,400 African-Americans lynched in this country between 1877 and 1950. And we think that that's critically important because if we look again at these structures, how it's difficult to understand the bravery of Dr. Lafayette and Ms. Robinson and all of the people that participated if we don't understand the scale and the scope of the violence that was permeating our communities at that time. And it was most acute when we looked at racial terrorism and racial terror lynchings in our country. And so this is one of many ways that we try to create for communities to go and reflect on what was actually happening and to think about how that violence would have provoked some of the things that led to the modern civil rights movement and how that violence and our inability to actually face it and the silence around it continues to shape our policies today. So Kiara is going to come and explain a little bit more about the people that we're actually memorializing on this monument.
So as Evan noted, EJI documented over 4,000 racial terror lynchings throughout this country, and that includes 19 in Dallas County. Today we stand in honor of 3 victims that were lynched here in Selma, and we are very particular about the language of documented because we know that there are so many names that we still don't know, so many stories that are lost in oral history, but the ones that we do know and the scope of this violence, we want to make sure that we are able to learn and understand the legacies in which we are talking about many of these contemporary issues. And so today's marker tells the story of 3 men, and I just want to read you the text on the side that talks about lynching in Selma. The jail in Selma, Alabama was a repeated site of racial terror, lynching, and violence that devastated the African-American community. In February 1892, police arrested Willie Webb in Waynesville and moved him to the jail in Selma under threat that local whites planned to lynch him. Hours after Mr. Webb arrived in Selma, before he could stand trial, a well-armed lynch mob kidnapped him from the jail and killed him. The next year, in June 1893, the lynch mob seized another black man named Daniel Edwards from the Selma jail, hanged him from a tree, and hanging a note pinned to his back reading, "Warning to all black men that are too intimate with white girls. This is the work of 100 best citizens of the South Side." Racial terror lynchings continued in Selma well into the 20th century. On July 11, 1935, Joe Spinner Johnson was called from his work as a sharecropper and delivered directly into the hands of a white mob that bound him and beat him mercilessly. The mob then took Mr. Johnson to the jail in Selma, where witnesses heard him beaten while screaming. Several days later, Mr. Johnson's mutilated body was found in a field near Greensboro. He was a leader of the Alabama Sharecroppers Union that operated from 1931 to 1936 to help sharecroppers receive better wages and treatment and to reduce inequality in Alabama's Black Belt. Mr. Johnson challenged the exploitive and racially discriminatory practices of wealthy white planters and landowners, and for that he was targeted and lynched. All of these lynchings were terrorist attacks committed with the involvement and complicity of law enforcement officers, and they commonly went unpunished. Racial terror lynching in Selma created trauma and misery while reinforcing white supremacy and denying black people in this community the basic rights of citizenship. This is a history that directly created the environment that made Bloody Sunday happen. This is a history that continues to permeate Selma today and Alabama and the rest of our nation. And today, you all stand together with us as we say, never again. And when we look at this history, we learn from it, but we understand that in order to move forward, we have to confront it and we have to tell the truth. So today's event is about truth-telling. It's about how do we get to reconciliation through truth-telling and healing. So thank you, and we'll unveil the ceremony in just a few moments.
I'll get rid of the mic. I've been talking all week. I got saved, though, by the bell. A song I wrote for EJI, and a young man sung it so well, but Inca couldn't find him. So I taught it to Reverend Berry just a few hours ago, and when he didn't show up, I thought I had to sing it. Thank you so much for Reverend Berry for being here. Before he sings the song, I want to tell you about my cousin by marriage. She was lynched, not in the 1800s, but in 1981. He was lynched in Baldwin County where my husband was born. He was lynched after a hung jury refused to convict a black man accused of killing a white man. If you go to our museum, and I'm proud to say I'm so glad of what EJI is doing, but A3A knows that the first lynching exhibit in Alabama was in our Ancient Africa Museum, where my sister really created a way of telling that story that is amazing. So I want to give a hand and some love to my sister, who really worked there for literally nothing, because we don't have money for our museums. The one across the street, if it wasn't for Miss Pearlie working for nearly nothing, that would be no museum there. So I'm so grateful for people who care enough about our history to keep it alive. I also want to remember another young man by the name of Sammy. I don't know him by last name. No, I'm talking about another one. He was beheaded in 1971 in Perry County. I wish I had the book out here that me and Connie Tucker did called The Martyrs of the Movement. He was beheaded. And we tried to find more about him because it was in 1971 in Perry County. Then a white woman came to me and said her brother beheaded one black man and another one threw them in the river after cutting them up. So there's a lot more than 4,000. These are just 3 stories I know right here. These are the stories that are documented.